Hello, everyone. I wanted to have a short communication with you on a few things, hopefully to connect again and to alleviate some concerns and questions. I wanted to start with just reminding you that we are starting a new week. This week, we're in conservation and policy, so it seems like it would help a lot of people to have a due date for that first post on the reading. So I believe we agreed to Monday. I put in the syllabus Saturday by midnight. But the earlier, if you do it between by Saturday, the latest on Monday of each unit, that'll keep you on track to then check back in with the class sometime in the second week to write comments to people. I am looking at another tool in Sakai that doesn't break out all the conversations separately. So I'm going to see if I can make that work for us for the next unit. A lot of you have some questions and just concerns about how the State of the System group project is doing. So I want to go over with you again the main goals. So this is in the syllabus. I'm not entirely sure what you're seeing right now because I can't see anymore. But from the state of the system, we know that you chose a location, or you got assigned a location, and we are trying to apply the learning that we've done in the reading and in the class, videos and things, to a project, to a specific place. So the question that we're addressing is, what do we do with what we know about Earth system processes and climate change dynamics? So this is really what you're addressing. And the assignments are scaffolded in drafts. Each one of your drafts kind of builds on the next one. And it's all happening in, your Google Doc. And I am going to try to review them again this week. So this says the assignments are scaffolded and drafts are due starting September 26th. Your group will create a Google Doc and you'll have your references, potential Google slideshow images for your presentation, drafts for your final presentation, maybe lists of questions that you would bring up with the group for us to discuss, list of tasks that each member is doing, etc. So in the face of the effects of natural and anthropogenic forcing, such as rapid climate change, citizens, scientists, and policymakers rely on integration of independently derived data from regional or biome scale investigations to design effective mitigation, management, and conservation strategies. So through this assignment, you will develop and share the current scientific understanding of rates and processes and consequences of global climate change in your area. There are 3 goals for this project. Again, I'm reading off the syllabus here. To strengthen your engagement with the course learning, to work within a focal region and have a reference point. So, for instance, when examining plate tectonic processes, you might wonder and research whether and how plate boundary activity affects earthquake frequency, tsunami risk, volcanic activity for your region. When evaluating global atmospheric circulation, you might wonder and then go find out how prevailing winds influence the weather patterns in your corner of the planet. The second goal is to provide an opportunity for you to develop and demonstrate your ability to apply what you've learned. So your engagement with this project will allow you to demonstrate your ability to integrate and apply your understanding of global environmental change science to a particular region, analyze, interpret, and report on the current state of environmental science and related cultural and socio-political concerns. You'll tell us what's known, what are the primary environmental concerns, how might concepts such as resilience, adaptation, and mitigation be applied. You'll identify uncertainties that science has not yet addressed or answers, answered, and you'll creatively apply your course learning to propose solutions to some of these challenges and environmental change in your chosen geographic region. And the third goal is through your group work, collaborative paper writing and presentation, as well as through learning from other groups' project work, we will all gain a variety of current regional applied perspectives to ground and enliven our comprehension of the temporally extensive and spatially vast phenomenon of Earth systems dynamics. Okay. So group work and individual work can be scheduled by you when it works for you. You know, each of you are trying to research the most up-to-date information. Your inquiry should be focused on the questions that are posed weekly, but they can expand. Work progresses more productively when the frame and purpose of the research are clear, the division of labor is considered, and discussing topics together and working together on how to present ideas. Group members are encouraged to research and provide regional context for topics that interest you if they're not covered in the questions. So if one of the topic questions is really interesting to you, you can dive deeper, spend more time on that. There will be parts that you can frame together and parts you can research and create on your own. The final presentation is going to be informative, engaging, and offer us a summary of your work that focuses on what is known, where are the gaps, maybe uncertainties in your knowledge of the processes and rates of environmental change in that region. So this is an opportunity to apply techniques for investigating and integrating all of your Earth systems knowledge. Okay, so with that being said, I want to share something that I just created when I read your feedback. So here is just a sheet that I read each week of what questions I asked you about. So I want to start with the center and the focus, which is your region. So although I'm wanting your paper in APA format, in terms of the references and in-paper citations, the way that you divide it up is very, very much your choice. You could have an abstract in the beginning. You could label it abstract, or you could talk about a summary and have a summary paragraph or two in the beginning. You could have a region and then describe your region in the beginning. So there's lots of different ways to do this. Now in part one, that first part, what I really asked you to start with was, what are the critical environmental issues? Where are we with the geology, the land? Explain that. What's the geology like? What's the land like? And that is even things like biome, right? And the geology, the rock type, the soil type, the tectonic activity. So tell us about all of that, and geologic hazards, right? So are there volcanoes? Are there earthquakes? So that's like big picture stuff. So I'm looking back in first, it was called The State of the System Part 1. So this is what what some of the questions are. It's also asking about air circulation, water, what's the climate? So that was the first kind of part of your project. And again, as you build on this document, these things might shift a little bit in how you organize them, because if you notice with part 2, it was, okay, what are the land use patterns? Are there soil issues? So that might go in a little bit to the geology, but it's also land use is a little bit different. So maybe you'll have geology and land use, and the person who really is interested in geology specifically would take on both of those. There's also resources there. So what are the natural resources? Are there diamonds? Is it coal? Is it oil? Is it gas, natural gas? Is it a forest? Is it trees? What are the resources there? And how is extraction or exploitation affecting those resources? And then the next part for that part 2 was habitats and if they're changing. And then are there earth systems that are exacerbating or mitigating the environmental change processes? So you might not get to that yet, but that's something I just want you to be thinking about for even your wrap up is, okay, what's happening here that's affecting like the larger picture of the climate? So you could just stick, with habitats that are changing. Okay, part 3, which you've done, is current state of the environment. So I was interested in nature and then the social political aspects of the environment. So first of all, the nature, like how much has been protected or not protected, how much is being exploited, not exploited. Social and political, social where, you could bring up issues of poverty in that area. Are there social, like nonprofits that are working to help the environment there? Are there scientists who are doing research there? Political would be, are there any policies? And that kind of gets into this next one, environmental policy. So are there policies that the government might be addressing that are specific on, and maybe there's so many in your area, there's, policies over soil and mining and extraction. Maybe there's policies over air and climate. So maybe you just choose one or two. Maybe you choose one and you go into a little bit more detail on one of those policies. Are there any resilience or adaptation stories that you can find? Do you have any ideas at this point about the future of that area? Now, this also moves into part 5 and 6, in that these resilience and adaptation stories are potentially some of the indigenous groups. So if you look at part 5, and this all kind of mirrors the information that we're reading for those weeks in class. So, the week of part 1, we were really just kind of overview, looking at air, water, climate, and critical environmental issues. And so that's what I wanted you to be looking at for your State of the System project. Now here, when we get to part 5, let me just turn my syllabus page. Part 5, I might have messed it up. Part 4. Oh, I skipped part 4. Yeah, there we go. So part 4. Part 4 is climate trends, right? So are there any cycles, like from your first assignment when you did your biogeochemical cycles? Is there anything that you see in all of your reading, right? They might not say specifically in your research, like, oh, the carbon cycle is being affected by X, Y, and Z. But have you noticed from your reading a certain cycle that's popping out to you that you might be worried about? So climate trends, cycles, are there any instabilities? Part 4 is the anthropogenic forcing. So what are humans doing? This leads us to the human population in your area. And this, kind of relates to some of the policy parts in part 3 that you've already addressed. Food security, what is that looking like for your region? Again, that kind of also dovetails on some of the land use pattern and soil issues. And then what are the policies here in part 4? So that was, let's see, what does the question say? What are policies and actions at global, national, and regional scales? So are there any COP overview or agreements that, affect your area? So then we move to part 5 when we're reading a lot of indigenous works on climate change and earth systems. And you are going to start seeing, is there an indigenous group or is there many that are in your region that have information, knowledge? Obviously they do. Is it published? Is it something you can access and include that in your work? Are there stories of adaptations? The other part of part 5 is finding a vulnerable species like a plant or an animal and doing like a little case study on that, similar to that part of our book, Love, Joy, and Hannah, that has like little case studies. So maybe you talk about that. Maybe you talk about that animal or plant and how maybe a geologic factor, an air, a water, a climate, a land use pattern, something affected that vulnerable species, and tell us the story. And then part 6 is kind of wrapping it all up. Are there uncertainties? Are there things you could not find information on? What still needs to be figured out and studied? Is there anything that you've learned that you could propose as solutions to some of the challenges of the Earth system's change in your geographic region? So that's what you're going to add to part 6. So I wanted to give you, I'm sorry, I'm going longer. I wanted to give you this version of this project because it is a little bit a work in progress as you move through. And some of the different groups are having issues with, having time to get together, figuring out how to divide up who's doing what. And maybe if you just looked at it like this, you could kind of pick out some big chunks that you could re-divide and separate into, you do this, you do this, you do this and this, because I'm looking at it as it's kind of like a UN report. Now, in general, when they're finished, they are very polished and you go through and you can't tell whose voice is where. But in this situation, I know you're all really busy. We have, an election next week. We have a global pandemic. We have holidays. I'm impressed that you're all hanging in there. So I don't want this to be this really kind of big, frightening, overwhelming project. So I'm going to propose that maybe with your group next, you look at it with this kind of outline and potentially think, all right, I am really interested in this piece and this is what I'm going to do. And when you turn in your paper, you have it separated out in the way that you divided the work. And that's okay. I would like one full reference section that's not, by each part. But if you look at it and you say, okay, we want the first paragraph to really be about the region, and then one person wants to take geology, land, geologic hazards, land use patterns, maybe the resources, maybe, you pick something like the environmental policies, and you pick something like food security, and then you pick, a piece of the indigenous groups, traditional ecological knowledge, then that's kind of your load, and you're going to write those sections. And you could divide it up so it says, geology. And then you could have another section that said air, water, another section, climate. You could have your case study of a vulnerable species and it's separated out on its own. You could have the environmental policy pieces and the current state of the environment in with this part 4, the human population, food security, and policies. So this is meant also to be a creative process. So there's not one way that I want to see these final papers. What I want is this story about your region that addresses the critical environmental issues, the geology, the air, the water, the current state, the environmental policies. And if you wanted to save your thoughts on the future, of the area. That can go at the end. And these traditional ecological knowledge and indigenous groups and a story of adaptation. Story, it doesn't maybe have to be of adaptation. Maybe it's of resilience. Maybe it's of habitat or species management, but some story. It would be interesting to hear some story related to an indigenous group in your area. And then part 6 with the uncertainties and the final touches and what remains to be figured out. So maybe that goes in with the future of the area. So I hope this helps kind of do a little bit more framing for your State of the System project. If you have concerns or questions, please do email. We can set up a Zoom. We can do a phone call. Remember my phone number, 805-319-5761. And just know that I want this to be, fun for you. And I want you to get the most out of it. And I know a lot of you are having a hard time finding a time to meet with all of you. So if you could, prioritize maybe one meeting that organizes everything, that might be key. All right, I hope this was helpful. Thanks for your patience. Good luck.